Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. This is Adam Huss coming to you from Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much for listening. I've become convinced that vines and trees are talking to me, teaching me. Multiple guests I've interviewed give credit in one way or another to the plants themselves for the wisdom they've gained in relation to how to live and farm. More and more, as I've worked with plants and observed them and listened with that part of myself that doesn't hear in words, I've begun to realize they are teaching me. As I've eaten them and drank their fruit, they have changed my mind and body as they become part of it, as they become part of me. In fact, there's a rise in the ingestion of mind-changing plants and fungi. I think they've begun doing this for more and more of us who have been long separated from them because things have gotten so extreme that survival is actually a question rather than an assumption. The interesting thing is that I don't think the plants are worried about themselves. I think they're trying to wake us up. I think they may be trying to save us. My guest for this episode is Ryland Englehart. Ryland co-founded Kiss the Ground in 2013 and leads the organization as executive director, producer of the Kiss the Ground film, and host of the Kiss the Ground podcast, all of which I highly recommend checking out. As a 15-year entrepreneur, he is also the co-owner and prior Mission Fulfilment Officer of the nationally recognized plant-based restaurants Cafe Gratitude and Gracias Madre, located here in Southern California. And he does so much more. I met Ryland at a vineyard in Santa Barbara that has been purchased for the express purpose of converting it from a conventional and extractive form of viticulture to a regenerative organic ranch. The occasion of our meeting was a fundraiser for Kiss the Ground, the organization. And if you haven't seen the film documentary, Kiss the Ground, I can't recommend it enough. It's the movie that introduced regenerative agriculture to over 10 million viewers worldwide. If you're a Netflix subscriber, you can watch it tonight, and you should. Let me speak plainly. Regardless of what kind of agriculture you're in, whether it's viticulture, pommeculture, or otherwise, regenerative agriculture is the best solution to industrial agriculture's degradation of our environment. If you're wondering what exactly regenerative agriculture is, Ryland gives a great explanation right at the beginning of this conversation. Ryland may be regenerative agriculture's biggest spokesperson. And in this conversation, he talks about wine's unique ability to communicate the story and benefits of regenerative agriculture. There's something infectiously hopeful about listening to Ryland speak. He's brutally honest about the realities we face, but he also has a long view perspective that is rare. He's at the center of a growing global movement that is heading in the right direction. And it's hard not to come away feeling that he's not just a spokesperson for Kiss the Ground, but he's actually a spokesperson for the earth and the vines and the plants themselves. If you enjoy this podcast and want to support it, there are several ways you can. The most crucial support is financial, and there's a link to our Patreon page in the show notes. Thank you for those of you who have recently subscribed. It's a huge help, and I'm so grateful for your support. So if you haven't subscribed, you can do that there. You can also leave a great review on your podcast platform of choice, and we're currently looking for sponsors who share the values that we promote on this podcast. If you'd like to contact me, please feel free to reach me at info@centraliswine.com. That's info@centralaswine.com. Enjoy. Ryland, thanks for doing this. Welcome.
You're welcome, Adam. Thanks for the invitation, and it was great to meet you a few weeks back up in San Ynez. And thanks for following up, and thanks for spending your time sharing beautiful earth-centered stories through the hourglass of wine. And I appreciate it.
No, I mean, that's my pleasure. And that was such a lovely event that, you were responsible for in large part. And, that's where we met. And it's probably a good place to start, just in terms of what you were doing there and why you were doing that. We were on the San Ynez Ranch, I think they're calling it now. It used to be Bridalwood. You feel free to talk about, why you ended up there and why that was chosen as the place for what we were doing there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so we were in San Ynez on a ranch, a vineyard that's been recently purchased by a gentleman named Scott Ulrich, and who's part of a group called Chapter 3. And they're a group of childhood friends who have gotten together in their sort of third chapter of life, um,
Is that where the
to
name comes from?
yeah
Oh,
uh,
that's great.
yeah to do something. They've had their own level of sort of individual success, and made it in their own sort of own right, and now they wanted to come together to see how they could collectively put their efforts and energies to giving back, and creating a level of contribution or legacy or making a difference on the planet, or to the world at large. And they saw and got connected to the work of regenerative agriculture through seeing the Kiss the Ground film, which is a documentary film that came out on Netflix 2 Septembers ago. And uh, it's been seen by over 10 million people, and is really being used as a tool to easily and in a very digestible way communicate the optimistic and hopeful path of regenerative agriculture being a solution to our climate crisis, our water crisis, and our human health crisis. And that when we take care of soil, uh, nature, ecology, the systems of the systems of life can better thrive. Whereas when we're degrading soil, it's kind of like the basis of a civilization is our soil. That I think Robert or not FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, said, a nation that destroys their soil destroys themselves. And we, as Kiss the Ground, and as the initiative that we set forth most recently called Regenerate America, um, we say that a nation that rebuilds their soil rebuilds themselves. And, that the
Mm.
film, the Kiss the Ground film, really painted this beautiful visual experiential story of having audiences get brought into a very hopeful narrative around what is the future of life on earth, and can we are we going to just continue to destroy and degrade and extract and degenerate, or is there a new possible relationship that we have to nature? And I say new in that it's new for the majority of the collective. It may not be new for some cultures, um, indigenous cultures, um, place-based, land-based, more agrarian-based cultures, where because they were more connected to the land, and they're more connected to the layers of life, that they saw themselves as how to be a what's called a keystone species in an ecosystem, where when we play our right role, our right relationship in nature, that nature under in all the sort of layers of ecology beneath our action, or connected to our action, actually can thrive inside of how we are behaving. And there's a possibility of, and there's a lot of examples of agricultural systems that are showing that, well, we're producing the goods, the fruits, the crops, the yields, the harvest, the ecosystem doesn't degrade, even though we are harvesting off the top. And so it's
Yeah.
could be seen as a um, you know some could say, yeah, sounds like a utopian idea that is never gonna work or doesn't work in reality. And some can have that position, but we've as an organization, um, we found I co-founded an organization with one of my good childhood friends over 10 years ago in Venice, California, about and called Kiss the Ground, which is inspired by a Rumi quote, the poet, which says, "Let the beauty you love be all that you do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground." And,
Mm.
you know, that really expresses to me, there's lots of ways to love, there's lots of ways to make a difference, and and specifically in relationship to the earth. And when I learned that soil was such an important basis for a healthy environment, a healthy climate, a healthy food system,
And delicious wine, I should
and
say.
delicious, exactly the terroir, yeah, exactly that the soil, the aliveness of the soil makes the aliveness of our taste buds dance. The
Yeah.
someone liked to say that um, the soil is the ecstatic skin of the earth, and that ecstatic, when that soil is alive with biology and microbes and life, that means there can be a lot more nutrients transferring into those plants, or those vines or those trees, and in turn those fruits have a more vibrant, alive flavor that uh, dances on our tongue.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, thanks for jumping right into that because I was going to ask you, in relation to growing things like, the plants that give us wine, what is the importance of regenerative agriculture? But you jumped right into that. I appreciate that. Um,
Yeah, so I kind of went on a long, windy path from where we were in San Ynez, which we were at a fundraiser event for the nonprofit organization that I founded. And chapter three, Scott, Stephen, who's part of chapter three, Dan, also part of chapter three, Rick, um, these gentlemen got together, put on this amazing event in
yeah, it
this
really was.
incredible vineyard, um, that has gone from a conventional commercial uh, sort of wine production system to they're now in transition to be um, producing grapes in a regenerative way, which ultimately, in a very simplistic way, regenerative agriculture is producing a some kind of crop yield from the land, but instead of the land degrading um, over time in production, it actually is enhancing. It's regenerating well in production. So how do we?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's in a very simplistic form. Regenerative agriculture is a farm in production of producing a yield, a crop, something that's ultimately, um, you know, producing. The farm is a profitable, a business that's profiting economically, but also the farm is ecologically um, prospering and getting healthier year after year.
Right. I just as you were talking and you quoted the Rumi poem from which Kiss the Ground gets the title. I think there's like a secret message in the title of this, which is um, Kiss the Ground. It clearly, just on the surface seems and is about gratitude, about thanking, being grateful for this earth that sustains us. Um,
Oh
and
my
loving
God.
it,
Yes.
love and gratitude. But then the secret, I think, is the humility that is required to have that gratitude, the kneeling part that comes before that. And
Yes, Adam. Wow, you're dropping it. I love this. Most people don't back. They're just like, okay, kiss the ground, love the earth, okay, love the soil, okay, um, but kneel and kiss the ground. Thank you for bringing that secret to the forefront. Yes, this is brilliant. Keep going. I like what you're thinking.
yeah, no, I mean, just as you're talking about the sort of this global system, and it's just, you think about what this attitude of whatever it is, of dominance is, and then you start comparing it to, not all cultures are like that. There are these indigenous cultures that are tied to the ground, tied to the earth a little more closely, where regenerative agriculture is much more the norm. And I think the idea that we, like Europeans came to the Americas, and they found this sort of verdant, what they called wilderness, but really it was the subtlety that comes from humility. It was people who had integrated into, because they didn't see themselves as dominant over that thing. I mean, I can't put myself in the position of those people, obviously, but this is just an idea that I'm toying with, to play on that idea of humility, and what it would look like, and how that would shape a culture and a land differently. Um,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
I
I was just at a conference listening to Graham Hancock speak. I don't know if you're familiar with Graham Hancock.
I'm gonna
Are
write
you?
down the name. I don't. I
Um,
No.
he's a historical anthropologist. Um,
Okay,
is that
that sounds
anthropology?
right.
Is he's study of human
Yeah.
civilization, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So, and basically, he's a total black sheep in the sort of mainstream narratives of human history. And he just came out with a show that's on Netflix. But I just saw him talk at a conference down in Palm Desert this past weekend, and one of the things that struck me and I walked away with was, he's talking about a civilization that was, 12,600 years ago, um, which is not normal history or not normal anthropology. And
Right.
basically, speaking to what could have been the mysteries of Atlantis, but basically giving a scientific explanation of a um, some pieces of a comet hitting an ice sheets of during an ice age, which ultimately flooded and put enough water to bring the oceans up 400 feet, and that there was um, some pretty sophisticated cultures living um, living at on the ocean, on the coastlines, while there was still more sort of hunter gatherer esque cultures, which on some level I was like, that doesn't make sense. What that there would be, these different degrees of civilization in different parts. But then if I think about it, it's still like that today. There's AI taking over the internet and automatic learning, and there's still the Achuar people living in Peru, living very, very uninterrupted by the the current culture. So
Yeah.
the fact that there wouldn't be different, sort of cultural time frames or levels of sophistication within, cities, philosophy, astrology, architecture, agriculture. Uh, why wouldn't there be? Anyways, but there's a long tangent to get back to your humility piece, which is basically his view on why those cultures, there was a level of sophistication, but ultimately what happened was they became arrogant and thought they were above, in the mythology, sort of above the gods or above. um, but I would also say, in a more grounded way that I can relate to now, is like above nature, that we could
Right.
dominate, that we could, genetically modify, that we could sort of be above the ecological functions of life, and think that we could kind of manage the whole thing, from
Mm.
our minds, from our technocrat minds. And
Yeah.
um, that ultimately that was you know um, the one of the mythologies of why that culture essentially got decomposted back into the into into nature, was they basically saw themselves as high and mighty and above the earth, and in turn, when they felt like they were above the earth, they essentially created the conditions to the off themselves, um, or nature off them, because they were essentially being a a pest versus being a contributing factor to the overall ecosystem.
Yeah.
And one could say we're at that point right now of, um, you know, and one could even say that COVID, lots of opinions about COVID, um, but you could also say, you know, that was uh, you know, a shockwave of, um, biological, um, decomposition of an unhealthy society.
Mm.
And when we know that when nature is at imbalance, it will take it, it'll take itself down to so that it can create fine balance. Because if there's an imbalance, it oftentimes has a way of, um, you know ending whatever is out of balance, such that it can find more homeostasis, more balance again. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that culture decomposed. Um, some could say, we're not that far away from creating tipping points for where we would decompose our ability to have a civilization. And then there's sort of this vision that I've been, holding in my heart and mind, that there's a more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible, and that world is a more harmonious world, or life in relationship to nature, and a more balanced, um, yeah, a more balanced relationship to nature, with humans and animals and the living world, with this context of regeneration as something that we can implement and start to or remember how to live in the guides of, and operate from. And when I think about that paradigm shift of, human beings seeing themselves as part of nature, and that we can help revitalize it through our actions and our methods of agriculture, I get really excited, especially seeing some large examples of how that's being done around the world. And it gives a framework for hope and possibility that I think most people, don't have. Because and the way I know that is because, even though 10 years ago I thought I knew a lot about the environment, I thought a lot knew about sustainability, I thought I knew a lot about the problems of the world, and yet I'd never had seen this, system of regeneration, and understood the way that photosynthesis and plants and trees and soils, work, and that the way we do agriculture could actually be a healing, reviving, restoring system, versus the the current context that it's an extractive system.
I have several questions. I think what I'm gonna say is, does wine have any special power in helping to talk about these things
Wait,
from
say
your
it one.
perspective? I mean, I know wine is, it's just this context in which we met, and I'm just wondering if you have done it, have any thoughts about like if wine has any special power in terms as a subject or as a
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, the most influential and profitable, the most influential foods are and profitable foods are the ones that give us a psychological enhancement. They provide a mood elevating experience. They alter our consciousness. Um,
yes,
so so I would say yes. I mean, wine. I mean, just as what's coming up is like wine is one of the foods that, especially those who have um, resource and power and influence, um,
hmm
appreciate, and
yeah,
um, they appreciate the story that comes along with them, and they like to understand that story and express that story. So I think from just I've been on a mission to change a narrative and
yeah,
change a context and bring belief to a new or old idea that's being remembered. This
right,
idea of regeneration, and so I think wine serves as a really powerful vehicle because it brings people into an elevated mood and experience, and it tells a story. It's oftentimes um, holds a beautiful image on the bottle, um, and there's it, it's a thing that people really appreciate discussing the nuance of, the subtleties of. And it's
yeah,
interesting. Again, I'm having this conversation for the first time, as far as like these ideas, but um, on some level, we're a little bit, as human beings, and this is a way over a generalization, but we're a little bit dense, and we're a little bit not nuanced in our our thinking and conversation. And I think it's interesting just in this moment where I'm thinking about wine, and I'm thinking about how people love to talk about the subtleties of it, and the the all the flavor nuances and all the descriptors that come along with people's experience of wine. Um, and then just the opportunity for, I mean, wine is in to just flip back the page to like in regenerative agriculture. um, one of the key distinctions in regenerative food systems is like understanding the difference between perennials and annuals, and perennials being a more um, a more beneficial food system for regenerative agriculture, because you're not tilling, you're not replanting, you're not fertilizing, insecticiding, fungiciding um, nearly as much, because you're not starting from scratch with a new plant every year and need to take it through its most vulnerable stages to getting to a crop. In perennial orchard or vineyard systems, there's a much more stable perennial system of life that occurs more like a forest than a natural environment that's being um, tilled, planted, fertilized. So
right,
um, I'd say, yeah, wine and the opportunity of wine being a really great crop for regenerative agriculture to, and I mean, again, this is actually another cool insight I'm having, in that, when you don't even know this maybe, but I've been running restaurants in Southern California for almost 20 years, um, in Northern California and then Southern California, with restaurants called Cafe Gratitude and Gracias Madre. And, when I started promoting regenerative agriculture and promoting this idea that our food system and our food choices could be a solution to climate change, and that we could put the excess carbon in the soil, and we could heal the soil by supporting regenerative agriculture, and then in turn supporting more nutrient dense, high quality food. Um, and then I wanted to start putting those ingredients into my restaurants naturally. It
Right.
was difficult to find sources of farms that were really doing, um, you know, legitimate regenerative agriculture and had a supply chain that was dependable enough such that I could bring them into my restaurant and have a consistent story of some specific ingredients or some specific items on the menu that really were reflecting those values and those practices. But wine was actually an area that I could bring in and kind of lean on with uh, uh, with in a quicker way, because there was distinctions in the wine already, and not that they weren't in other food ingredients, but the whole biodynamic thing of Rudolf Steiner and biodynamic agriculture, which really is one of the earliest labels or distinctions of regenerative agriculture, that is not as far back as, cultures that were just understanding those that way of life and integrating it into how they were stewarding and tending to the land and tending to their landscapes that they were managing.
Yeah.
Speaking back to more place-based indigenous cultures of the past, but in a more recent contemporary time, since more conventional agricultures had become the norm, biodynamics was, a system of agriculture that really, where organic was a list of what you can't use to be organic. It wasn't necessarily a list of what you could do to bring more life to your farm, more biodiversity to your farm, more um, you know uh, seeing the whole farm as one living system, and the farmer really managing the farm as one intertied, connected system. And so biodynamic wine really is, and there's quite a lot of vineyards who have gone down that path, saw wine as the agricultural um, crop and system and product that could have, enough profitability in the margins to be able to do the good land stewardship on the land, and would have the interested, connoisseurs of wine who really, talk about the quality of the soil and how that translates into the flavor, and how that totally goes into or makes sense, um, if you're talking about the nuance of the land and how that land translates into flavor. You probably don't want a bunch of chemicals you know on that land, then getting into that flavor, then impacting, like, just from a experiential sort of, even just the romance of wine. It just does, the chemical, the chemical or synthetic nitrogen or synthetic inputs don't really um, lend well to the poetry of the appreciating the flavor of wine and the land. And then there's this whole other layer of sort of synthetic input that ends up in your wine, that I
Yeah.
don't think it is intuitively works within the 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 more romantic and more nuanced appreciation for what wine is, the quality of flavor, the savoring of it, the appreciating of the nuance and where that came from. And so I think in our minds, we intuitively don't want those um,
Yeah.
those chemicals
Yeah.
and inputs. We want that natural taste and flavor, where I don't think we care to think about it that much when we're having a salad or we're having a burger or we're having a piece of toast. It's, we're less connected to um, that full system than we when we are one. I mean, this is my kind of assessment. It's not nothing
Yeah. Yeah.
factual per
No,
se, but it's just
it no, there's a lot of good stuff. I was laughing because I was envisioning, like a sommelier taking a sip of wine and being like, yeah, delicious notes of cherry, lavender, and glyphosate.
yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah,
It
there's a
just
little
doesn't
bit of
quite jive, right?
yeah. Oh, that's funny.
um, and it's funny. Wine is one of those things where it's like as you're thinking about that, I was thinking about, you're talking about lettuce and toast and stuff like that. It's like most people don't stop and say, what does this toast taste like? Like it's like we only say that about wine. We're just like, toast tastes like toast, lettuce tastes like lettuce. Like wine is one of those things where you're asked to stop and actually sort of analyze it and break it down into smaller components that you can metaphorize, like that you can, and that there is that nuance that you're talking about, that is this special thing that I think is both fun and entertaining and interesting, but also lends itself to all these things that you're saying about why it can be a good vehicle. Thanks for all that. Thanks for I really appreciate your thoughts. That was nice. I love the idea, that yes, like it seems that we also need to move more toward a perennial form of agriculture. We were just talking about that book, Restoration Agriculture, which is all about that. But
Oh yeah, that's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
this idea that the food systems that are present in a living ecosystem without us here are mostly perennial. Like if there was some disturbance, or if we went away for 100 years, those same things would come back, and they would still be there. They would have changed. Things have filled in different. There may be new varieties of them, but these are things that that landscape, that ecology would have perpetuated indefinitely. It wouldn't whereas if you planted a cornfield and then came back in 100 years, there wouldn't be no corn, most likely. Um, and wine is like that too. You can plant a vine and potentially come back in 100 years and find lots more vines. It's happened quite a bit. I've been part of finding things like that. Old vineyards here in Southern California, even, where the somebody planted a vineyard, and and then it was abandoned for 80 years, and you come back and that vineyard found a way to like just keep going, and then the branches lay down in the soil and put out their own roots, and new vines sprout up in this sort of natural propagation way, and it just spreads out, and now you have new, yeah, and then seeds drop from the clusters that were hanging and have sprouted into new vines. And if it's planted in the right spot, it just regenerates and propagates and creates new things, and some of those new things are really interesting, and if they've survived under neglect, they might be even better than the original thing that was planted there. You, I, I was just tangenting on your thoughts there too, but I noticed something else from what you were saying that I wanted to go back to. It's this sort of bipolar aspect that I think probably it sounds like you live in, and that I know I live in. So I can only speak for myself, but it's this, on the one hand, wanting to have a lot of hope, and then on the other hand, seeing the realities that are around us. And I just rewatched Kiss the Ground before talking to you, just to have it fresh in my mind. And I wrote down this quote from one of the guys: "The way that we're feeding ourselves is undermining the very ecology that we are dependent on." And
Jeff Creek.
it's the
Yeah.
yes, yeah, and it's that idea. Yeah, I mean that's the idea. Whether it's feeding with foodstuffs or feeding with wine, um, in large part, this is what we're doing, and we see that. And I'm wondering, I guess there's a two-part question I want to ask you. One is, I know you've talked a lot about sacred economics or sacred commerce, and I know that what you've tried to embody with Cafe Gratitude, which if anybody hasn't been to Cafe Gratitude or Gracias Madre, I'm just putting them up there as some of the best restaurants in Los Angeles, where I live, and my favorite place to go, because you guys have done this great job of making incredible tasting food that's incredibly carefully made. And you it's great to go to a place, unlike everywhere else, where there's care put into the provenance of those ingredients. It's not just like trying to like run a business where you're getting the cheapest available thing to make the biggest profit off of selling it. Um and and then it's also, I mean, it's just really amazingly interesting food. And I didn't mean this to be an advertisement for Cafe Gratitude, but great wines, great food, and affordable price, and with care given to where you're sourcing the ingredients from, and a lot of really cool ingredients that are unique as well. I say all that to really just set up the question of this idea that you are embodying a business. You're working in a business world. It's a successful business. It's a successful restaurant. I hope it still is for you. And I'm wondering if you can sort of talk about, how do you maintain hope and deal with this sort of bipolar aspect of being having dark knowledge but needing to look to the light. And then how I think it relates, and that's why I make it a two-part question, but feel free to answer this in any way you want. But how to run a business in a business oriented world? I'm going to use a winery business, for example, since that's relevant to this conversation. But how to do that in a way that embodies this idea of sacred commerce and looks to the light?
Yeah.
How's that for a massive question for you?
That's a massive one. um, yeah. So many layers, right? Cafe Gratitude's been around for almost 20 years.
Yeah,
Um, and it's been, it's had its ebbs and flows, and it's had its, um, but I think, and honestly, right now restaurant business in California is very difficult,
yeah,
um, with just the lots of regulations, raising costs, more people purchasing food through Uber Eats, and them taking 30% off the
mm,
top, and restaurants don't even have those kind of margins. So in many
right,
cases, the you know what's becoming the biggest part of our business is a part of business that's not profitable. um,
right,
and then within the you know um, vaporizing margins, the commitment to integrity of what we're doing, and what we're sourcing. uh yeah, it's
right.
very,
Makes it all the harder. Yeah,
very, very difficult, because um you know it's very difficult when margins are thin to take the risk of um paying unnecessarily more for things because they represent a greater value, or a greater values, or And I would say that over the 20 years of Cafe Gratitude, we started as a level of innocence and a level of commitment to this idea of serving the highest quality, best ingredient, clean, organic food. And the difficulty is scaling something and maintaining the the human. You can scale technology. That's easy to scale, but to scale human and nature connected systems is a difficult thing, and
Yeah.
maybe not even a meant to happen thing.
Yeah.
Um, you know, so this idea that just uh, things things need to get bigger and bigger. Um, in my experience, the more the less I became connected to the the people, the vendors specifically, the farms, the more compromise would just naturally happen, um, because you became less connected to the people's lives that you are either impacting positively or negatively by either being their vendor or serving them a specific ingredient that you knew about was made with such love and care, and the joy of being able to see someone get that and receive that and be delighted by that. So, um,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, I now live on a little homestead in Fillmore, California, next to my sister's farm, which is Soahart Farm, which is a 17-acre farm that um, has a CSA box program, that you can get regenerative organic produce delivered to LA. And we're doing we're also taking all the compost from all of Molly's restaurants from Sage Vegan Bistro in LA and bringing that to the farm to create healthy soil. And but one of the challenging things is, like, she has the conflict. She started the farm to be able to take the compost and supply ingredients for her restaurants, and yet, because the margins are so thin in her restaurants, her managers are incentivized to buy the cheapest produce possible, and in turn oftentimes will not even want to purchase her own produce from her own farm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and this is, yeah, I, I mean, I can say I'm right there with you in terms of winery costs in Los Angeles as well. I'm at the point where I don't think it's actually viable. I think it's like just, not in a scalable way anyway. Like, I mean, you can in small ways, you know, make it make sense, but yeah, to grow a business, there's a huge upfront cost, first of all, to set something up, and then there are ongoing, rent costs and things like that that are really, really high. Regulations are really strict and weirdly strict. Yeah, it's really interesting to to consider what might become of my winery in the future as well. Um, where where does that leave you with
Yeah,
with what you're doing?
yeah. I mean, I've stepped out of the restaurant business a couple years ago to just focus on my
Gotcha.
advocacy education and the nonprofit, because
Got it.
one, it was like the mission that was put on my heart, and the thing I was tasked with from sort of a higher calling. And, well, I love the restaurants and they've been amazing, uh, and there's aspects of it that I totally miss. There was there was a yeah I felt there was a higher calling to my life to be a messenger, evangelist, an advocate, an educator for regenerative agriculture, and having that becoming a culturally adopted idea and concept, and sort of desire for what the culture wanted. Um, and so I've focused there versus being in the the trenches of running the restaurants over the last
Yeah.
in the way that I have over the last 15 years. Um, so
So,
uh,
so, yeah, go ahead.
so that's just sort of my current paradigm personally. I'm still an owner and a partner in the restaurant business in Los Angeles, and it honestly, we don't it's a we're looking into a grim, we don't we're looking into like, um we don't have the answer to sort of get ourselves, um you know get ourselves into a better rhythm or context where the overall operating ecosystem is healthy and well, and can take care of itself, take care of its employees, take care of the suppliers. That right now it's kind of like, it feels a little bit like a race to the bottom, um, which is
Yeah.
a little bit depressing to admit and share. But that
Yeah.
is a current a current experience of doing business in the size, scale, and format that we've been doing it in in Los Angeles over the last 12 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even more than I guess that I am really curious what you do to maintain hope or to maintain, yeah, I wouldn't say optimism, but what do you look to in terms of, uh, I know regenerative agriculture is its own form of hopeful thing, and maybe that's the focus that you give. But is there, what else do you do in terms of
Yeah,
that?
thank you. Um, you know, I would say that in the material world, the things that give me hope are being present with my son, and seeing the joy, the innocence, the exuberance, the beauty, um, that he is. So just the joy and the hope of seeing that being emerge and coming to this world with, um, with such newness and optimism and innocence, um,
Yeah.
and and then that's one thing. The other thing is, um, I've I've had the blessed opportunity of um, experiencing, um, plant medicine ceremonies with the plant medicine ayahuasca, and the the thing that I always come back to is that love is this perennial truth, and it is at the center and is at the origin of consciousness and of humanity. And so I've been saying, ask me why I'm optimistic, and I say, because love and regeneration are perennial truths, that after it's all said and done, where it will end up going is the there will be a return to the consciousness of love, and there will be a return to ecological regeneration.
Mm.
And it may not, we may face, major global, I mean, we already are, catastrophes, and there may be, uh, but I think to have faith that there is a a higher power, that there is a divinity, there is a conscious intelligence of uh, love and creation that has allowed for this remarkable, beautiful expression of life to emerge, and that at some point we will be reabsorbed into this um, beautiful, benevolent experience of oneness, and that there's a level of faith in that, in the end, we return to a wholeness that is an interconnected experience of uh, love. And so it's a it's more of um, a spiritual faith and a spiritual connection that allows me to operate in the material world um, with more buoyancy, hope, and possibility. Um,
I think it's really worth noting that you mentioned some of that. The vision of that came from a plant uh, concoction, ayahuasca. That
yeah,
came from plants. I think that's really important to point out.
yeah. I've actually had the very explicit, clear thought that the context of society coming back to a regular occurrence of ceremony and the ingesting of plant medicines is a very, very strategic design that recognizes that human consciousness and the consciousness of, uh, or sort of the ego's interruption in consciousness of
Mm-mm.
thinking about the self and thinking about me, my, um, as separate, and not thinking about the we and the whole, that there was an intelligent design which said, all right, no matter where you are, who you are, there will be a cultural amnesia of disconnection from nature, from the earth, um, and to safeguard against that, let's put a annual, semi-annual experience of engagement with such plants that have us be humbled to our knees in our insignificance, and yet our connection to this greater intelligence that we belong to. And then from that humility and that connection, we're then invited to stand up and walk and do and be and create from that space of um, honor and respect and reverence and care and love for life, that then translates into a different model of, you know thinking and business and operating systems that um, that that then create a different culture, a different world.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I love that idea. I just wanted to ask you a final question. and maybe it's not even a final question, but the night that we met, I got a couple bottles of Kiss the Ground wine, I think. Is that true? Is there wine that is that Kiss
Yeah,
the Ground is
I,
doing?
I wish I could. I wish we were on video and I could hold one up to the camera. But yeah, Pinot
Yeah.
Noir, 2018, Kiss the Ground, um, Willamette Valley. I think
Yep. Yeah, the Willamette. Yeah.
Willamette Valley. Brooks Wine. Peace, Bread, Land, Wine. Brooks Wine, 1998. Yeah,
Nice. Yes.
they are um, in, I think, Southern Oregon, right? Southern Oregon. The
That sounds
Willamette.
right. Yep.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, they are part of the 1% for the Planet um, group of brands, and they're also a Demeter certified vineyard, and um, and they loved the advocacy education work that we were doing, and they offered to be a brand partner, and if we want to do a collaborative label and a Kiss the Ground label, and we said of course we'd love to. And again, back to, it's one of my favorite gifts to give is this
Yeah.
beautiful bottle of wine that carries the message of Kiss the Ground, um, which again is subtle and direct and has many layers to the meaning. Um,
Yeah.
and then it's a really, really beautiful tasting Pinot Noir, which I think, sometimes when the story around something is so big or important, and then maybe like the product isn't actually that good, but it's really fun when the story and the conversation around something is really great and has a beautiful meaning and narrative, and then the taste is also like equally as good as the story around it. and uh,
Yeah.
and so yeah, people can order a Pinot Noir Kiss the Ground, or we have a white. Do you have the white or you have the red?
I think I have one of each actually, because Wendy got one and I got the other.
Yeah, so the white. So I mean, they're both phenomenal wines. The white is, I think it's a combination of grapes, but I think it's Riesling is one of the strong, or like the prominent. Um, I'm looking. It actually doesn't. It just says it's a white wine from 2021. Um, but yeah, it's
And
a what's that?
I was just gonna say, are these available for if somebody listening wanted to get a bottle of one of these or
Totally,
both?
yeah. So you can order them on brookswine.com, but actually I'd recommend and would request you go to kisstheground.com and go to the store there, and you can purchase them directly there. That would be the best place to do it. Uh,
Very
so
cool.
yeah, so that's actually a really great way to end, and for people to
Great.
go and try one of these beautiful um, white wines that, or white or red wines that support the advocacy education work of Kiss the Ground, the nonprofit, and enjoy, as good of wines as I've ever tasted. And they're grown here, yeah, on the West Coast, and yeah, they're phenomenal.
I
So
love
you haven't opened them and tried them yet, Adam?
No, because I'm a professional drinker, so my drinking schedule is very busy, and so it's usually when I get a new bottle, it's like months till I can slot it into my drinking schedule. But literally, it's kind of nuts. I have to like schedule in breaks too, otherwise I'll drink every day, and it becomes a little unhealthy. Um, but yeah, no, I'm very much looking forward to them now too. I wish I could have said that I tried them and they're delicious, but I'm sure they will be. Are there any other things besides kisstheground.com where you'd like to send people for more info or to get involved
Yeah, I mean,
in
you know,
support?
kiss the ground. Really, we're building a movement around regenerative agriculture and advocacy for soil health and regenerative agriculture. And so, we have lots of ways for people to get involved. Follow us at kisstheground.com. I mean, at kisstheground on Instagram. We have a really beautiful educational thread that has a lot of, well thought out, curated content that's around education and advocacy for farmers, ranchers, vineyards that are doing, the sort of best in class regenerative agricultural practices. And
Yeah.
so, check us out there. If you're interested in learning more and using your voice and your influence to be an advocate for regenerative agriculture, we have an amazing course called the Soil Advocacy Training, which is an 8 hours of content, kind of like a master class on demand course for soil advocacy that has, everything from ranchers, farmers, soil scientists, doctors, communicating, all the different layers and aspects of soil health and regenerative agriculture and why it's important, and empowering you to really be a great communicator about this topic. Um, and then we also have a regenerative gardening course called Regenerative Gardening. So if you're wanting to apply the principles of regenerative ag to a small kind of backyard um, level of participation and engagement, we have a couple courses that could be really great for you that are also on demand courses on the Kiss the Ground website. And then, we're launching, or we launched in May of this past year, a really exciting initiative and campaign called Regenerate America: Soils Are Common Ground. And it's a bipartisan coalition of 100 organizations, brands, NGOs, conservation groups, farming groups that are aligning around soil is a very important place um, to find common ground. And can we um, put enough public pressure and enough specific pressure to specific congressional offices that we can rewrite the 2023 Farm Bill and increase spending from 1% on soil health to maybe 5% on soil health, which would ultimately lead to, upwards of $40+ billion of spending to incentivize and encourage farmers, ranchers, um, viticulturists to have access and funding to help make the transition from the conventional paradigm of agriculture to a more soil-centered regenerative agriculture. And so we're asking for
That's
people to
great.
sign, with their signatures. It's somewhat of a petition. We're gathering signatures to show the degree of support for this initiative, and I think we have over 10,000 so far. We got a long way to go, but we're
That's that's on the Kiss the Ground website.
that's it. If you go to Kiss the Ground and then on the top tab, it's called Regenerate America. Is the initiative, the coalition initiative, and so just go to regenerateamerica.com or kisstheground.com and then click the
Great.
regenerateamerica.com, and then
Take
sign on
action. Yeah.
to be a supporter of the initiative.
Great.
Um,
Love that. I'm doing it now. Thank you. That's great.
awesome, thank you.
Um, yeah, no, that's fantastic. I love that. Uh, there's a wealth. I mean, it's like the website is not just about. I mean, it's got a broad scope and it's deep and it's great. And obviously, if anybody listening hasn't seen Kiss the Ground, the movie, please do. It's on Netflix. So still up. I watched it today. I forgot how moving it was. I got all choked up at the end, just watching it. It's really, I mean, just seeing these people who care so deeply and know, what's at stake really, and know what the realities are that in the world right now, and seeing them, the way that they get moved by the importance of the message that you're spreading is really it was fantastic. I mean, it's moving and telling, and yeah. So thanks for doing all of that work that you're doing, Ryland, and thanks for doing this interview. I really appreciate your time and
Yeah,
thoughts.
I'm just grateful for the experience of being connected to a conversation, connected to a uh, you know thoughts and ideas, and feeling present with the things that are being said, and and just connected to them. So thanks for guiding the conversation in a great way, and allowing it to go where it went. And I hope that it was meaningful and valuable, and there was something that those that listen will glean from it.
Likewise, I'm great there with you.